imagination here.
Yeah. Oh, safari.
They aren't anyway.
Pretty wild stuff. What do we see there? Oh my goodness sake. Huge. Oh my goodness.
There's a hippopotamus. There's two hippos.
Yep.
And there's a giraffe and there's a one.
All kinds of stuff, huh? Okay, Grace.
Hey, Bookie. Hey, Bookie.
Yep, all kinds of monkeys.
Come on, Granddad.
Terrible monkeys. Okay.
Hey, is he going to show us fly trap?
Okay.
Hi, butterfly. Hi, Granddad.
Hi. What do you see over there?
That's somebody holding up the earth.
What is it?
We're just talking about it. And look, the gorillas. They're playing. Look at the gorillas. They're playing a game.
Oh my goodness sake. Yep, that's what they look like, all right.
Dave, here.
Pretty scary stuff.
Hey, Dave.
Don't bother people. Take a little swope of the place, sir. Have you done that already?
I think Katie did.
Emily that spilled the beans. It wasn't me.
I thought it was you. I said I heard it. Is that us? Is that us?
What the hell is that?
Oh, it ain't us.
She just didn't know they didn't know.
Emma. Hey, look.
Wander around. Gracie, what do you see in there? Hi. Look, there's the elephant. Some scary elephants.
There's a fish in there.
Oh my goodness sake.
I can't. I thought I saw the demon. Ah, look.
There you are. You're pretty good. Terrible elephants. cookie too.
Bring a steak.
Thank you. It's not like I haven't done it. We have lots of interesting stories just like that about your little. Oh yeah. Should we tell a few? I'd say Garden.
On top of a house with he was found as a rogue. The hideout is an Indian in a cave. This is him being a rogue man.
It's a turkey. The turkey is hiding.
Okay.
He's hiding. I wonder why.
This is a butcher.
Next is Christmas. It's on top of the house where they still Then here's the question mark. He's sitting inside the question mark because he doesn't know. That's my favorite part. Tom Turkey, Christmas feast. Yikes.
Yay!
His disguise go away and the very last thing is his disguise does it. Oh no. You love it?
I love it. Katie, would you like to get up and do your number again for the film?
Notice passing the season.
Trav, do you want to have Ethan do his performance?
Maybe. No.
Ethan's turn.
Dressed up as what is it called?
You can play with ball. What does a cow say? What does Santa Claus say? No, you're not going to do it? Okay.
Oh, I thought you said move.
There's his talent.
What does that look like? Move.
This is someone who wants to play the cymbals for me.
Maddie.
Give him an easy one.
What does Caroline say?
They're coming here to take me away, ha-ha. They're coming to take me away, oh-ho. Life is beautiful all the time, and I feel it. And I don't mind mom to say, oh, they're coming to take me away, ha-ha. There we go. Ready?
I think Granddad should have a stand on the
Okay. Granddad's gonna lead the band.
Okay, time for Granddad band.
Here's another one for you. Okay. Maddie figured out how to do the kazoo.
David, she's known how to do that for a long
Jingle bells,
time.
ready?
She's known how to do that for a long time.
Ready, get set. Jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. Hey, jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. Yay!
I like that picking, Gracie.
One more, now we'll do Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, right?
You know what? My father said when he was doing Jingle Bells wasn't
Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer
Reindeer,
had a very shiny nose.
like a light bulb,
If you ever saw it,
saw it,
you would even say it glowed
like a light bulb.
All of the other reindeers
Reindeer,
used to laugh and call him names.
I dare not mention
Never poor Rudolph
Rudolph.
joining any reindeer game. Then one foggy Christmas Eve, Santa came to say,
Oh, oh, oh.
"Don't with your nose so bright, won't you guide my sleigh?" Then how the reindeer loved him as they shouted out with glee, Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer, you'll go down in history. Thank you, thank you.
Yay!
Yes.
Thanksgiving parade.
No, they're different.
Get in the line. In the line. Love him. Woo-hoo. Good job. Maddie, give Bustin a kiss. Bustin, give Maddie a kiss. Quickly, quickly, give kisses.
Go in, Justin.
Be in the band, otherwise we're gonna expect the talent.
I think I can tap dance.
Yes,
All rules will be enforced.
okay.
Okay, here comes.
I lost game happy. So where was you first?
Alright,
David. Happy.
I am,
Jane, if you're gonna sing, you need to stand.
Because he's sad.
no.
He can't see you. You like him.
Scoot up.
Well, that's what you don't see in the audience.
David's offering to play
Okay,
the
let's
piano
get
for
All
you.
right, MJ, do you want, MJ's doing her drawing, you come.
Through everything I see. ready. Come here. No, come get us.
All right, Cassidy, I think we're ready. If you Thank you.
I messed up. Wait.
Very good.
That means Brandy wants you to play another
Just
number.
play as much as you know of the other song.
What is it?
Music Land.
I only know the first verse.
That's
The
fine.
first line.
Just play the first line.
I'm done. Safety.
And now Christian.
Christian's going to do it.
Okay, Gracie.
I'm not good with when does it go down.
Now for the minute waltz by
Gracie
Gracie.
has a piece she's going to do on
The Last Jedi. Okay.
Okay, now James is going to see how many times he can jump rope in a row.
We have Fleur Elise right here.
All right, go ahead, James.
2, 3, 4. Oh!
4, 2,
I think that's it.
1, 2, 3, 4.
I think 3 is a good number.
3 is about it.
I can't do it. Are we done?
Has everyone done a talent that wants to do a talent? And even those who don't want to do a talent.
But we're not naming any names.
I mean,
We're not doing
he didn't do it.
Brandy, that door's open.
He didn't. He didn't. Well, hey, because he didn't do it. Yes, he did.
Eli does the talent just by being Eli.
He knows how to impersonate a baby.
All right, John's going to do his part now. Gracie and Justin, will you
That's
come?
Eli's talent. He is being a baby.
Everybody come and sit on a chair so you'll be having good manners. Right, it's John's turn.
John's turn.
The book is
David, can you come get medicine quickly?
James, get Maddie.
Hey, Maddie.
I would have brought my own talent with me, but I totally forgot to bring it. I don't forgot to bring it. So what I do, I play the violin, but instead I have a secondary talent. I think it's a necessary one for everybody to have. God, Testament of Christ. No. I have my own testimony about Christ. I know that He lives. I know that personally in my own life, it's a lot. Having my parents move from Pennsylvania over here. For a job that we didn't know that my dad's going to get it now. We found out the reason why was because of the fact that there was doctors here who knew how to take care of problems in my head. And there for me it was a very good blessing for me. It's like being able to live. And since I don't really remember that, I remember when everyone that I've been run over by a car. And when I came back to that place, I looked at it and said, you know, I should not have been alive. But I can only say one thing is that as I got run over, I saw two persons outside of the car. Raise her up. But I don't remember anymore. Like to say, I know this gospel is true. Say this in Jesus Christ.
Amen.
Okay, I have my cranberry Thanksgiving, but Travis has a talent which we have to go to the gym to see. Do you think we can all go to the gym and come and watch Travis and come back and have cranberry Thanksgiving without losing control of the whole thing?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
First of
Thanksgiving,
all, I don't think Travis cares.
and then we'll do
Cranberry
basketball.
Thanksgiving first and then Travis, okay. All right, the children, if you want to see the pictures, you'll need to come up here. Want to see the pictures?
Christian, this was one of my favorite stories when I was young. I just thought about this yesterday.
You can tell from the wear on the book that she has read this to her own children and now to her grandchildren.
They've got a guy in there that looks just like Pedro.
Is this on anyone's list? No.
Okay. Maggie, oh, I do not read for people who are not listening. Justin, are you ready to listen? Granddad, I think this jump rope needs to go back in your bag. This is a problem jump rope. Maggie darted about like a black-stockinged bird in search of wood for the fireplace. She and her grandmother lived at the edge of a lonely cranberry bog in New England, and the winds were cold as the edge of the sea. Today, Mr. Whiskers was helping Maggie with her chores, and they soon had armfuls of firewood. Happy Thanksgiving Day, Mr. Whiskers, Maggie smiled at her friend. That wasn't his real name, of course. It was Uriah Peabody. But Maggie had called him Mr. Whiskers ever since she could remember. Maggie was very fond of Mr. Whiskers. Her grandmother was not. Too many whiskers and not enough soap, she often said to Maggie. Mr. Whiskers, indeed, sniffed Grandmother, peeking from her kitchen window. She pulled the curtains tight again. Whenever Grandmother baked her cranberry bread, she pulled her curtains tight. The reason for this was that her cranberry bread was the most famous for miles around. It was so famous that bakers all over the countryside had offered great sums of money for the recipe. Although Grandmother scoffed at the whole idea, she still felt it was something wonderful to leave to Maggie. She carefully hid the recipe behind a brick in the fireplace, Oh, a lot of people would like to get that recipe, she fumed to herself, especially Maggie's clam-digging friend, Mr. Whiskers. Strange how he always showed up when she took down the great yellow bowl and all the good things that went into it. Gonna need a drink. Scat, shoo, she would call out the window every time he came too close to the house. But forget all that today. It was Thanksgiving, her favorite day of the year. The cranberries had been picked, boxed, and sent to the market. The dried corn had been soaked, and the corn pudding made. The turkey was roasting in the old iron oven. Turnips, tiny green peas, and a pumpkin pie were ready. The cranberry bread was cooling on the wooden board. The real work was done, and the feast was almost ready. Every year, Grandmother invited a guest for dinner and allowed Maggie to do the same. Ask someone poor or lonely, she always said. It never mattered to Maggie or her grandmother that the red carpet was worn and mended or that the silver spoons didn't match. Friendship and sharing were important, but everyone knew that. Red-cheeked, Maggie raced into the house. While she changed, Grandmother excitedly told her whom she had invited. Mr. Horace was his name, and he was staying at the town hotel. He actually bows, and he has a gold cane, and smells of lavender, said Grandmother happily, and he's all alone. Maggie looked a little uncertain. My guest doesn't smell of lavender, she began, and he hasn't had a Thanksgiving dinner in 20 years. I invited Mr. Whiskers. Mr. Whiskers! Grandmother didn't appear to believe she had heard right. You mean here? In the house? But now there was a sound at the door and a loud clanging of the knocker. Quick, Grandmother, take off your apron. Grandmother opened the door, and there they were, both guests, Mr. Horace, peak-cheeked and starched, and Mr. Whiskers in his old captain's hat. As they came in, trailing behind was the smell of lavender in an aura of clams and seaweed. Mr. Whiskers held up his hands to Grandmother. Clean, he said. Oh, and where is your tie? Grandmother said. He lifted his long whiskers. Right here, where it's always been, he growled. Maggie thought she saw a smile behind the whiskers. Humph, said Grandmother, and taking Mr. Horace's arm, she led them into the dining room. Yes, that too. A log fire sputtered, the glasses shone, and certainly no one would notice that the silver spoons didn't match. Let's sing We Gather Together, said Maggie, trying to warm things up. They all joined in the old hymn, and midway began to sing out with cheer and gusto. Grandmother started to trill like a bird until Mr. Whiskers fixed her with a quizzical gaze and shook his ears. Grandmother Macomber could wiggle her ears. Your grandfather's mother. She learned it to bother her teachers in school. How about 16 men on a dead man's chest, he roared, slapping his knee. Mr. Horace looked pained. Grandmother peered over her glasses. Really, she said. Maggie left the table and reappeared with the roast turkey. The corn pudding, peas, cranberry, jelly, and turnips soon followed, and then came pale, sweet butter and Grandmother's famous cranberry bread. Feast of feasts, murmured Mr. Whiskers. Well, we have all heard about your cranberry bread, chuckled Mr. Horace, and the recipe hidden in the kitchen fireplace. It's in the dining room fireplace, said Grandmother, looking over at Mr. Whiskers. She added, and you, sir, will never find it. Mr. Whiskers stared at the turkey and pretended not to have heard her. Maggie began to get nervous, but she made sure everyone was served some of each dish, and they began to eat. What a great full dinner that was, with everything cooked with crisp edges and tender centers. How delicious, said Maggie. How exquisite, said Mr. Horace. How about some more, said Mr. Whiskers. At last they finished dinner, and Maggie and Grandmother cleared the table and went into the kitchen. Watch that Whiskers fellow, Grandmother whispered to Maggie. Maggie opened the kitchen door just a small bit and peeked into the dining room. Her eyes widened. Grandmother, he's found it. Get all the pages. Crash, clumpity. There was a sound of wild scuffling, loud shouts, and falling chairs. Two figures pushed to the front door. For a moment they wrestled at the doorway, and then seemed to burst into the purple dusk. One chased the other into the cranberry bog. The nerve of him stealing our recipe, said Grandmother with her fire in her eye. Maggie knew whom she meant. It wasn't Mr. Whiskers, she said. It was Mr. Horace. Mr. Horace, Grandmother looked shocked. But why? Because he owns a bakery in the city. And Mr. Whiskers knew this, Grandmother asked. Yes, said Maggie. Mr. Whiskers kindly came today to watch Mr. Horace and to have dinner. Mr. Whiskers came puffing up to the door, holding Mr. Horace by the collar. Proudly, he held the recipe high in the other hand. Don't trust a man because he smells of lavender and has a gold cane, he growled. I think he's saying beauty is more than skin deep. Grandmother stood up very straight and looked hard at Mr. Horace. You, sir, she said, are a disgrace. He's worse than that, said Mr. Whiskers. He's a recipe robber, said Maggie. And the starch seemed to leave Mr. Horace. No pumpkin pie for you, sir, said Grandmother, handing him his cane. Mr. Horace began to sniffle. They left Mr. Horace on the doorstep. Grandmother closed the door firmly, and this time she took Mr. Whiskers' arm into the dining room. Maggie thought she could see Mr. Whiskers smile. They sat by the warm embers of the fire and ate pumpkin pie with whipped cream. How delicious, said Maggie. How delightful, said Grandmother. How about another piece, said Mr. Whiskers. The wind blew and rattled the shutters, and outside the door came a loud wail from Mr. Horace. He's crying. Goodness, is he still there, said Maggie. Shall we let him in? It is Thanksgiving, said Grandmother. It's especially Thanksgiving on a cranberry farm, Maggie replied encouragingly. They looked at Mr. Whiskers. It took great effort on Mr. Whiskers' part, but with true character, he stood up and said, Maggie, open the door, and we shall give him the last piece.
Mighty water.
How about 16 men on a dead man's chest, Grandmother asked him while Maggie went to the door, and even his whiskers couldn't hide that smile. Okay, we all need to sing.
They used to have on the back cover.
Yes, the recipe.
It's been taken away.
But you know what, and no, the recipe is here, but one year I made that recipe and it was the worst cranberry bread I've ever eaten. So I've been looking for a better recipe. Okay, I think that we need to sing Over the River and Through the Woods. We haven't done that at all this year in our family. What?
While we go into the gym.
That's a good idea. Let's sing it while we go into the gym and watch Uncle Travis's talent.
Look up.
Good for you.
I know what the
Smile.
Over the river.
Say, not by the hair of my chin, chin, chin.
We go. The horse knows the way to carry the season of light.
Hands, please.
Over the river.
Madison.
Through the woods.
Hands, please.
The wind that blows. It stings your nose and bites your nose. Over the ground.
Okay, catch up with Gracie.
Over the